Hi, I'm Dr. Casey. I'm here to talk to you today about the best holistic interventions that are easy and simple for helping with our sleep. This is one of the biggest topics that I find when my patients come in. The first thing when their hormones are changing is that sleep tends to go awry. So, this is why I want to talk to you today about how we can assess our hormones to help sleep better through the night. Here we go. All right, let's talk a little bit about some solutions for insomnia. So when we talk about insomnia, we generally, a lot of times I'll have women come in to see me and they'll say, I wake up at 3 in the morning and then I just lay there with my mind going until 5, until I can finally go back to sleep. And sometimes I'll also hear women who come in and they just can't get to sleep at all. And that becomes a really big problem throughout the night. And as we know, the more we are not sleeping, the more tired we get and the worse we feel. And so it just tends to be a terrible spiral. So let's talk a little bit about when our hormones are changing, how it impacts our sleep. So we have three types of hormones that really tend to determine the way that our sleep functions. And then we're going to talk a little bit about neurotransmitters at the end too. So we have our stress hormones, particularly cortisol. We'll talk a little bit about that. We have our reproductive hormones like estrogen and progesterone. And then we have our thyroid hormone. So let's talk a little bit about how each of these impact us. Let's start with cortisol because that's our biggest offender when we're talking about hormones and sleep. So cortisol is one of our primary stress hormones. And the way that cortisol works is that when we have stress and we go into that sort of adrenaline rush, fight or flight mode, first we make a neurotransmitter, or we can call it a hormone called adrenaline. And adrenaline goes and it helps to make our heart beat fast so we can pump blood to our brain and to our body and to our muscles so we can escape danger quickly, because historically that's what stress was, is we had to escape from danger. We had to run from the bear. So cortisol's job comes along after we make the adrenaline, and it raises our blood sugar. It makes our blood sugar go higher so we can feed our brain, feed our heart, and feed our muscles so we can make that escape. Now, cortisol also raises our blood sugar in another scenario, and that's when our blood sugar just gets really, really, really low. And so that's, 7 or 8 hours after the last time we ate, cortisol will kick in, and so we can make our brain and our body work. Cortisol is produced normally in a circadian rhythm. So normally it should be highest first thing in the morning, right when we wake up, and then it should be lowest when we're sleeping. And that's because it helps us feel really alert. So when cortisol's high, we're going to be awake. Now, what can happen is that, just like I was talking about, if we eat dinner, say 6 or 7 o'clock, by 3 a.m., it's been 8 or 9 hours since you ate last. And so that's when our cortisol kicks right in. And that makes our brain wake up, bing, and then we're just laying there and we're thinking about everything in the world. So if our blood sugar is unstable, if we have any hypoglycemia, or we have metabolic syndrome, or we have diabetes, or any sort of insulin resistance, this is going to be worse. That will make this worse. Also, if we're already stressed a lot during the day, our adrenals are already sort of making a lot of stress hormones, and so that's going to aggravate this issue. So if we have a lot of stress during the day and it's been all these hours since we ate, 3 a.m., we're going to be up and we're going to be thinking. A really good way that we can manage this is to eat some protein before bed to keep the blood sugar stable throughout the night. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So next, we can talk about our reproductive hormones. And when we talk about sleep, I generally like to talk about the balance between estrogen and progesterone. Now, estrogen and progesterone are really important for our menstrual cycles. They're really important for reproduction, but they're also really critical for how we feel even after our reproductive years. And they really determine how restful we can feel. So there are three major times in our lives when I see our reproductive hormones making insomnia worse. One is during PMS, one is during perimenopause and menopause, and then third is when we see sort of an estrogen dominance. And that manifests often for women as cycles that are way too heavy or way too short. Now, the thing that is the same through all of these different conditions is that progesterone relative to estrogen is low. The two of them need to balance each other, and we need to have that progesterone higher relative to estrogen. So anytime that our progesterone has dropped, then we may see insomnia for women. Next, let's talk a little bit about thyroid hormone. So what and where is your thyroid? So your thyroid is kind of right here. It looks like a little bow tie under your skin there. And thyroid regulates how quickly our organs function, how fast we sort of reproduce our cells. And so when we have the thyroid going out of balance, even too high or too low, then that can really impact the way that our brains are thinking and our amount of alertness. So I will often see that too much thyroid, hyperthyroidism, will cause insomnia, but too little thyroid, hypothyroidism, will also cause problems with sleep. So whenever we see, someone who's tired and maybe gaining some weight and they're not sleeping, I always want to check thyroid to make sure that it's going to be doing everything we can to keep your sleep normalized. So just a little bit about our neurotransmitters. Our neurotransmitters are the chemicals that our brain makes that tell us how we feel, how alert we are, how sleepy we are, how happy we are, how sad we are. And there's a few neurotransmitters that really can impact our sleep in particular. So GABA is our primary neurotransmitter that tells our brain that it can shut down. So it's an inhibitory neurotransmitter. So especially when our brain is kind of going all night long, GABA can be a nice option. Melatonin is something that's produced that tells our brain that it's time to sleep. Melatonin is produced when it's dark outside. So when we're exposed to a lot of bright light at night, it shuts down our ability to make melatonin, and melatonin is one of the primary things that we need for sleep. And then serotonin can also impact how sleepy we feel. And that needs to be in balance because that also helps to set that sense of being okay. Things are fine and we can rest now. A couple of neurotransmitters that make sleep harder. One is that adrenaline, or what we call epinephrine. It's one of those primary stress hormones. When we're stressed, sleep is not going to be easy. Glutamate, interestingly, is something that is something that we get from our diet, but also that we make. And glutamate is something that is very stimulatory to the brain. It keeps our brain keep on ticking along. And then histamine, which we normally think of as something related more to inflammation and to allergies, even though generally when we see that sort of swelling in our body, that can be histamine. But also when there's a lot of histamine circulating in the body, perhaps because we have a lot of sensitivities to our environment, that also keeps our brain really wide awake. So all of those things can really impact the quality of sleep. So now that we know a little bit about how those hormones make us sleepy or not sleepy, what can we do so we can sleep through the night? So the first thing I like to do for my patients is we just test. How do we know what's out of balance if we don't know? So we can do a lot of different types of testing that really can give us a good idea of what we actually need to support. The first thing that we can look at is our reproductive hormones, and that'll include our estrogen and progesterone levels, as well as our androgens, testosterone and DHEA. That gives us a really good insight into not only how we're going to sleep, but then also all of these other symptoms that you may be experiencing, whether it's problems with your cycle or PMS or menopausal symptoms. That gives us a really good idea of what may actually be happening for you. Cortisol, if we are really concerned about where your cortisol is at, there's been a lot of stress, then we can look at that 4 times during the day to make sure that circadian rhythm really high during the day, really low when we want to sleep. We can make sure that our body is doing that. Our thyroid is really important, again, especially when there's been some profound weight changes or there's digestive issues or some really profound fatigue. Thyroid is something I always like to check. And then if all of those hormones seem to be imbalanced or we're addressing them and we don't see any changes in the sleep, neurotransmitters are a really great way to go. And we can do some good testing that gives us a really good idea of where your neurotransmitter balance is at. So, but with that in mind, let's talk about just, what are some really simple things that we can do? There are all these, there's a whole world of what we call sleep hygiene, which is, all the basic things we want to do to get our body ready to be restful and ready to shut down. The two primary things that I find to be the most lacking for people and the most powerful for getting their sleep to be better is one, screen time. Screen time is kind of epidemic for us these days. And the more we can cut off that screen time, the more we're going to get our hormones in balance and in order for a good night of sleep. So 1 hour before bed is really the time to be turning off any of that sort of bright light. Next, a protein snack before bed, particularly if you know that your blood sugar isn't the most stable or you have any sort of trouble with your blood sugar. And also if you know that stress is really a big component in your life. So when I say a protein snack, the reason I want you to do that is because when we eat something right before bed, say, 10 o'clock at night, if that's when you're going to bed, you have a little bit of protein and it keeps your blood sugar stable for longer throughout the night. So you're not having that cortisol kick in at 3 a.m. and then you're up and thinking about the world. Now, I don't want you eating a steak before bed, nothing that's going to sit in your stomach and make you feel weird and keep you up, but just something that's a light protein like a hard-boiled egg or a handful of nuts or an apple and peanut butter. All of these can be really, really helpful for keeping that blood sugar stable so we stay sleeping throughout the night. In terms of our natural therapies, we want to be really targeted. And so testing our hormones first always is a good idea. But we have some other places, some places that we can start. If you know that your adrenals need some support, ashwagandha is a great herb for helping the adrenals to sort of shut down for the night and sort of relax. So we're not making as much of those stress hormones. And magnolia can do something similar there for you. If our progesterone is low, we can look at different types of botanicals like chaste tree berry to help to get that up relative to your estrogen levels. And if you have anything going on with your thyroid, ashwagandha again is a really good support. But then because melatonin and thyroid have a relationship with each other, when we make a lot of melatonin, we tend to decrease our thyroid production, and that's really healthy at night. So melatonin can be a really nice support for helping that, to initiate that brain relaxation and then balance with the thyroid overnight. And then finally, if we just need to access our neurotransmitters, we can do things like just take some GABA, which that's our primary inhibitory neurotransmitter that tells our brain to relax. And we can try things, again, like lavender and other relaxing botanicals that help with anxiety or help the brain to sort of go to sleep. That's all for today. Thanks so much for joining me, and feel free to contact me if you have any questions.